All right, my friends, buckle up because in today's episode, we are tackling a biggie. A biggie because it is a conversation that has dominated humankind literally since the dawn of our existence. And that is life's great unknown. What happens after we die? Is there an afterlife? Now, that is a very big topic, and it's one that I'm going to be tackling in a number of different episodes of Death on the Daily. But for today's episode, we're going to be looking at it through the lens of near-death experiences. So those humans who have died, but then ultimately been resuscitated, come back into life, and can live to tell their experience. We're going to be looking at what those experiences and the science around them can prove about whether there is or there isn't an afterlife. In today's episode, I am going to be diving into the science, the spirituality, the skepticism, and my personal perspectives on the matter, with the invitation to bring yourself from the perspective of your beliefs, of your values, of all of you. All beliefs and all perspectives are welcome within Death on the Daily. And when it comes to life and to death and to all of life and death's great unknowns, I really truly believe that there is so much that we can learn just by showing up with beautiful curiosity and listening and learning from each other. So let's dive in. Now let's start with some scientific facts on near-death experiences, because for every I saw a bright light, I saw that tunnel, I went towards it, I'm sure there are a lot of eyebrows raising in skepticism. But far from being spiritual woo-woo, near-death experiences have actually been studied by science since the 1970s. And this came about because it was actually when CPR became mainstream that actually there was an increase in the reporting of what is called near-death experiences by those whose hearts had stopped but then were resuscitated. I'm going to quote the University of Virginia's definition of what near-death experiences are, again, as we just root into the science base of it. They say that near-death experiences are intensely vivid and often life-transforming experiences, many of which occur under extreme physiological conditions in which no awareness or sensory experiences should be possible, according to the prevailing views in neuroscience. So, as we can see, clearly there is a gap in that neuroscience understanding. And that really shows what the opportunity is in this research. And the research continues. And according to Scientific American, the stats show that about 1 in 10 patients in a hospital setting who go through a cardiac arrest and are then resuscitated go through a near-death experience. So the numbers are not small. And actually, in totality of all of us humans globally, it does amass into the millions. And the interesting thing with near-death experiences is that actually there's a list of typical features that people have gone through. These are that sensation of leaving your body. You might have heard survivors speaking about that. It's that where you're floating above your body, seeing a brilliant light, sometimes at the end of a tunnel, feeling a sense of peace, of well-being, and of unconditional love. Some have reported a life review, that recalling of really important foundational events in life. And for any of us workaholics, I'm pretty sure that that's probably not going to be showing up in that list. As well as some reporting a preview of events that are yet to come, that look into the future, as well as reports of encounters with our loved ones who've died, as well as with religious figures. Again, all of this is dependent on beliefs, and it all varies between our experiences, yet there are these key anchors that show that there are themes through these near-death experiences. And these otherworldly experiences can have profound transformational impacts on the person who then comes back into their body and comes back into their life as their heart starts beating again. But it's also important to note that there is a bit of a survivor bias in how near-death experiences are reported. We often hear that of, it's very calm, it's very peaceful, I just went towards the light. But actually, for some, they've reported that these experiences have been quite distressing. And I just wanted to mention that because, again, I want to make sure that everybody's perspectives can be shared through Death on the Daily. And when it comes to the thresholds of life and death, this is where it gets really, really interesting, because clinically, there is a pronouncement that we have died when the heart stops beating, when we stop breathing. But actually, there's a lot of research into the question of how long afterwards does our brain continue functioning? What sort of consciousness is still there? And this is really what's rooted in the reflections of survivors of those near-death experiences. So what can science prove to us about whether near-death experiences show that there is an afterlife? In truth, it's not so much. And as I was doing my research, what I could see is that there's definitely different camps, and there's different religious and spiritual beliefs where it's tying these experiences into the fact that that is a proof that there is an afterlife beyond. But actually, where the science is really rooted is in trying to understand what happens to the brain in those moments after the heart has stopped, breathing has stopped, and the patient is clinically, technically dead. And there have been some really interesting studies, including one done on 4 patients who were dying, that showed that once their heart had stopped, they actually saw a burst in brain activity and consciousness. With the authors of that study actually saying that that could be the proof as to why people who have near-death experiences get that burst of consciousness of all of those memories being played back based upon the parts of the brain that have been activated. But while this shows to us why we go through those near-death experiences and helps to root that into science, it doesn't help to answer what lies for us beyond. Is there a certainty in that afterlife, in that meeting of us to our ancestors, and in that us floating towards that bright light at the end of a tunnel? So in conclusion, I don't really have a conclusion here, except to say that there's obviously gaps in science. And also one thing that I found really interesting is the fact that modern medicine deems that point of death to be when the heart stops and the breathing stops. But clearly for me, what this, and I mean, I did biology at uni, but that's where I stopped, and that was the age of 21. So I'm not exactly an expert in this. But for me, where I get curious is actually, what's that bit beyond? Because there is research that shows that actually the brain's deterioration and stopping, that is a process that goes beyond the heart stopping. So it raises the question for me of, when do we define that point of death, and actually what is that consciousness that exists on the other side of our heart stopping? And I think that's a really interesting one, going away from perspectives of the afterlife. But I think that could be a really, really interesting one as well when it comes to relatives and those loved ones around the person who's just died, of actually, is there a longer time where maybe in some sort of level of consciousness, they can still sense us and they can still connect into us, no matter what our beliefs are. But when it comes to, is there an afterlife? Obviously, there is not much that science is able to prove at this point in time. But I thought I'd end this episode with my take, where I land on this, and also just my personal beliefs, just if you're interested. And honestly, I don't know, and I'm quite happy to sit in this space, but what I do feel is my beliefs. So my beliefs are that there is something beyond, and I really love to root into the cycle of life, death, life, death, life, death. My mum's side of the family is Hindu, and Hinduism is all about that, the karmic cycle, that reincarnation, that rebirth into that next life, what's next. So that's really, really where one part of my spiritual beliefs root. But actually, on the other side, I also believe that my loved ones, my ancestors, my daughter, that there is that reconnection that will happen. And it's something that brings me great comfort. Perhaps it's something that I root into in order to bring me that comfort. And I'm okay with that. Because actually, for me, it's a gift to know that at the end of this life, I will be reunited with my granddads, with my daughter, and with anyone else who I've loved and who has gone before I have. And when I connect into this space as well, I do it through my connection through where I feel my intuition, that inner wisdom inside of me takes me. And I do believe that I have spiritual connections to just those who have gone before and to something that is bigger. So for me, it's about just watching out for beautiful signs. I talked about this in my recent episode with Jonathan Mark, who's a celebrity psychic medium. And it was really around just look for those little signs, whether it's a beautiful insect that keeps visiting you, or another animal, or Jonathan was talking about specific numbers. And through that, he knows when his aunt is there and is bringing him a message. And for me, that's something that I really connect into. When I see those signs, I go and journal, and only I can know what those signs should be, and only I can connect into them and the meaning. It's something that's very, very personal to me. And I live in a household of very differing views. You might have tuned into my episode where my hubby, Jordan Young, joined me to talk about his Maori culture. But actually, for Jordan, by way of his religious, spiritual beliefs, he is very much rooted in the atheist camp. So it's really, really lovely, actually, I find, talking to him and just getting that different perspective. Or when I share things that from my spiritual perspective, he'll curiously question me in a way that is just, I find, quite expansive and really interesting to be able to, I suppose, very gently, in a very respectful way. He doesn't do it to crap all over what I've just said, but to just debate it and to hear each other's sides. But it is interesting because from his perspective, we die and then that is it. There is nothing more. We go into the ground and we're compost. We are there with the worms. Whereas for me, I believe that whichever of us goes first, that the other one will be waiting for us on the other side. And so for me, what that's meant is I've also said to Jordan that if I go first and then there is an afterlife, I'm definitely going to be there being like, I told you so, when it's his time to go. And what does this mean for me, for us in the meantime? For me, really, when I root into near-death experiences and death experiences, the fact that at some point we will all die, when you look at the gift that near-death experience survivors, not all of them, but some of them, a good amount of them have, is it gives them perspective on life. It gives them perspective of what's most important. And that is really the meaning and the mission of Death on the Daily. What can death and being with death teach us about how to live this life well? So I want to live like this life matters. And for me, that is really about rooting into the gifts in the present moment, the gifts that are here and surrounding all of us, because none of us know when this life is going to end, and potentially we might be going on into an afterlife. But hey, this life is pretty wonderful, isn't it? So let's enjoy it exactly as it is for the time that we've got left on it. As I shared earlier, in conclusion to this podcast, there is no conclusion. If you were coming here for definitive answers, you might not have found them, but if you are up for joining me in this curious line of inquiry, then hit subscribe on this podcast, on this channel, because I'm going to be rooting into different areas of, is there an afterlife, spiritual beliefs, other aspects of life and death and everything in between. And my note to self that I end every episode is really simple today. It's just stay open and curious. It's something that I always love to be. I learn and I grow through listening, through exploring, through keeping an open mind. So I would also love to hear from you, your thoughts on this episode, what your beliefs are. Drop them in the comments, and let's get talking about life and death. And until next time, if you want to join me in living fully, loving with all of your heart, because we truly do not know when we're going to not just take our last breath, but have our last little gamma brainwave of consciousness. And wherever you are in this journey, know that I'm sending you lots and lots of love. All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside, and we'll never make it.